50 years old, 23 years of loyalty. And it took 7 minutes to erase his entire career. He sat at the glass conference table, facing 3 people young enough to be his children. Their laptops were already open. The decision had already been made before he walked in. "We're moving in a new direction," one of them said calmly. "We need people who are faster, younger, more adaptable." The words were polite, professional, and completely empty. No one mentioned the contracts he had saved. No one mentioned the nights he stayed alone in the office while everyone else went home. No one mentioned that the company would not exist without the systems he built with his own hands. A junior manager laughed softly, almost jokingly. "In this industry, experience doesn't really matter anymore." He signed the termination papers without hesitation. No anger, no begging, no explanations. As the elevator doors closed, he heard someone whisper behind him, "At least now he can finally retire." What they didn't know was this. He designed the core system the entire company depended on. He still owned rights they never bothered to read carefully. And most importantly, they had just fired the only person who could save them in the next 6 months. 3 months later, the company was in free fall. Major clients pulled out. The system began to fail. The same young executives who laughed now panicked, desperately searching for the name they had discarded. But by then, he was no longer looking for a job. He was preparing to buy the company. And when they finally stood in front of him, asking for forgiveness, he looked at them calmly and said only one thing. "It's too late." The humiliation didn't end in the conference room. That was only the beginning. By noon, the news had spread across the entire floor. Not through an official email, not through HR, but through whispers, glances, and half-hidden smiles. "He's gone." They finally did it. About time, honestly. He packed his desk slowly. Not because he had many things, 23 years reduced to a few folders, an old notebook, and a framed photo of his wife and daughter, but because every movement felt watched. No one helped. People who once came to him with problems avoided eye contact now. Some pretended to be busy. Others didn't even bother pretending. A young engineer leaned toward his friend and whispered loudly enough for him to hear. "This is what happens when you don't keep up." Another laughed. "Yeah, the company needs innovation, not fossils." He said nothing, not because he agreed, but because he had learned something long ago. When people believe you're finished, they stop hiding who they really are. The HR manager appeared at his desk with a cardboard box, as if he were some kind of criminal being escorted out. "I'll need your badge and laptop," she said, avoiding his eyes. Company policy. Company policy. The same company that once begged him not to leave. The same company that offered stock options he declined because he believed in loyalty over leverage. He handed everything over calmly. As he walked toward the exit, the glass walls reflected his image back at him. Gray hair, worn suit, shoulders straight despite the weight pressing down on his chest. 23 years. Not a single farewell. In the parking lot, his phone buzzed. A message from his daughter. "Dad, did everything go okay at work?" He stared at the screen longer than he should have. "Yes," he typed. "Everything's fine." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie parents learn to tell. At home, the silence was worse. His wife noticed immediately. The way he placed his keys down. The way he sat without turning on the TV. "They let you go," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "They said I'm no longer a good fit." She didn't respond right away. She simply poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him. "You built that company," she said. "They know that." He smiled faintly. "They know what they choose to remember." That night, he didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because memories wouldn't let him. He remembered the first year, working weekends, sleeping in the office. He remembered fixing a system crash at 3 a.m. while executives blamed each other. He remembered training the very people who now called him obsolete. And he remembered something else. A clause. A small, easily overlooked clause buried deep in an old contract. At 4:17 a.m., he opened his laptop. The next morning, the company's Slack channels buzzed with jokes. Guess we're finally modern now. No more dinosaur code. Fresh blood. A young manager posted a meme. An old man walking into the sunset with the caption, retirement mode unlocked. It got dozens of likes. None of them noticed the system lagging slightly around noon. None of them paid attention when error logs began to multiply. They wouldn't panic yet. They never panic until it's too late. 2 weeks later, he ran into one of his former colleagues at a grocery store. "Hey," the man said awkwardly. "Didn't expect to see you." "Likewise. So, how's retirement treating you?" He almost laughed. "Busy," he replied. The man hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Between us, things have been rough since you left." "Oh, systems aren't behaving. The new team doesn't really understand the architecture. Management's stressed." He nodded, as if hearing about someone else's problems. "Well," the man said, forcing a smile. "Good luck, I guess." "Good luck." As if luck had anything to do with what was coming. Inside the company, pressure was building. Deadlines slipped. Clients complained. Meetings grew longer and louder. The executives demanded solutions. The young engineers blamed legacy code. The managers blamed technical debt. No one blamed themselves. And no one dared to say his name out loud, because admitting they needed him would mean admitting they were wrong. One afternoon, the CEO slammed his hand on the table. "This system is falling apart," he said. "Who designed this mess?" Silence. A junior engineer swallowed hard. He did. The room went quiet. For the first time since his firing, they looked at each other not with confidence, but with fear. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. They hadn't fired a problem. They had fired the foundation. And the cracks were starting to show. The clause was still there. Unchanged. Untouched. Ignored for more than a decade. He had signed the contract 23 years ago, when the company was nothing more than a rented office, a flickering server, and a promise with no guarantees. Back then, lawyers were expensive and trust was cheap. The founders needed him. Desperately. So they agreed to everything. Including a paragraph most people skimmed past. At the time, it didn't seem important. Now it was everything. The clause stated that any core system architecture designed solely by him, outside of company purchase frameworks, remained as intellectual property unless explicitly bought out. It had never been bought out, because no one thought they'd ever need to. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Not with satisfaction, not with anger, with clarity. While the company struggled, his life quietly changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily. He didn't post updates on LinkedIn. He didn't announce a new chapter. He didn't complain. Instead, he met people, old contacts, former clients, investors who remembered his name even when the company no longer did. One of them was Daniel Carter. Daniel had been a venture capitalist long before the word became fashionable. He had watched companies rise and fall, usually because they forgot who actually built the engine. "So," Daniel said over coffee, "they finally pushed you out." "They thought they could replace me," he replied calmly. Daniel smiled. "They always do." When he explained the clause, Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He simply listened. Then he nodded. "They're exposed," Daniel said, "and they don't even know how badly." Inside the company, denial had turned into desperation. Emergency meetings replaced planning sessions. Executives demanded timelines no one could guarantee. Engineers worked late nights, patching symptoms instead of causes. The new tech lead, a brilliant graduate with confidence and ambition, sat staring at the codebase like it was written in a foreign language. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. "Why is this dependency structured this way?" No one had an answer, because the system wasn't designed to be flashy. It was designed to survive. He had built it during a time when failure wasn't an option, when one crash could end the company forever. It was layered, defensive, and deliberately complex in the places that mattered. They had mocked it as old school. Now, it was untouchable. 3 months after his dismissal, the first major client terminated their contract. Official reason: performance instability. Unofficial reason: lack of confidence. The CEO felt it in his chest before he saw it in the numbers. Revenue projections dipped. Shareholders asked questions. Board members began to worry. Someone finally said his name. Not loudly, not confidently, just enough to be heard. Meanwhile, He sat in a quiet office overlooking the city. It wasn't a startup. It wasn't a corporate tower. It was a private firm. Small, focused, funded. Daniel had helped him set it up, not as a revenge play, but as leverage. You don't need to destroy them, Daniel had said. You just need to let them feel the absence. They hired carefully, engineers with patience, architects who respected systems instead of chasing trends. They rebuilt the core from the inside out, cleaner, faster, and legally his. Back at the company, the board demanded solutions. Can we rebuild? One asked. The CTO hesitated. Not without rewriting everything. That could take years. And without him, another board member asked. Silence again. The CEO rubbed his temples. Then call him. The HR manager looked uncomfortable. He hasn't responded to our emails. Emails. Apologies written in corporate language. Requests disguised as opportunities. None of them acknowledged what they had done. When the call finally came, he answered on the third ring. Hello. There was a pause. Then the CEO's voice, strained, careful. We'd like to talk. I'm listening. We're facing challenges. The team believes you may be able to help. Help. Not apologize. Not admit wrongdoing. Just help. I'm busy, he said. With what? The CEO asked, unable to hide the edge in his voice. He glanced at the window, at the city he helped build from nothing. Building something new. The call ended without agreement. Inside the company, panic spread, because for the first time, they understood something they should have known all along. They didn't fire an employee. They fired the owner of the truth. And the clock was no longer on their side. Revenge was never part of his plan. At least, not the kind people expected. There were no angry posts, no public statements, no dramatic confrontations. What he wanted wasn't payback. It was control. Every morning, he arrived at the office before sunrise. The building was quiet, almost empty the way he liked it. He poured his coffee, opened his laptop, and reviewed reports while the city slowly woke up around him. Numbers, trends, weak points. Daniel sat across from him one morning, flipping through financial projections. They're bleeding faster than they admit, Daniel said. Layoffs are coming. Investors are nervous. He nodded. And they still think they can fix this internally? Daniel smiled. They think they have time. Time was the one thing they no longer had. His team grew slowly. No rushed hires. No flashy titles. Each person was chosen carefully, not for speed, but for depth. A systems architect who had walked away from Silicon Valley burnout. A security expert who believed in prevention over reaction. A product strategist who understood users instead of trends. They didn't ask about his past. They didn't need to. They could see in the way he reviewed code, in the questions he asked, in the calm authority he carried without raising his voice. Leadership, real leadership, didn't announce itself. Inside the company he left behind, cracks became fractures. Clients demanded answers. The board demanded accountability. The CEO demanded loyalty. But loyalty couldn't replace competence. Engineers worked 12-hour days, patching one issue only to create another. Every fix revealed a deeper flaw. The new tech lead finally said what everyone feared. We're standing on something we don't fully understand. She was right. They were standing on his work. One evening, Daniel placed a document on the table. Acquisition scenarios, he said. 3 paths. Friendly, hostile, strategic. He didn't open it right away. Which one do you prefer? Daniel asked. Whichever one gives them the least room to deny reality. Daniel nodded. You know they'll resist. They already are. Resistance didn't worry him. Arrogance did. The media hadn't noticed yet. But analysts had. A few quiet reports surfaced, questioning the company's long-term stability. Stock prices wavered. Not enough to cause alarm, but enough to attract attention. Meanwhile, his firm released nothing publicly. No product launches. No announcements. Just progress. Late one night, he received another call. This time, it wasn't the CEO. It was a board member. We may have made a mistake, the man admitted. Silence stretched. We'd like to explore options. Options. Another word that avoided responsibility. I'm open to conversations, he said. not conditions. The board member exhaled. We'll talk. At home, his wife watched him carefully. You're calm, she said. I'm prepared. Is this about them? It's about me, he replied. About what I allow. She nodded. She understood. She had seen him give everything to a company that gave nothing back when it mattered. Back at the company, layoffs began quietly. Not the young ones. Not the confident ones. The middle layer. People who knew just enough to see the disaster coming, but not enough to stop it. Morale collapsed, and fear replaced arrogance. Daniel leaned back in his chair during one of their meetings. They're going to come to you again, he said. Soon. He closed his laptop. When they do, he said calmly, they won't be asking for help. They'll be asking for permission. Outside, the city lights flickered. The board was divided. The company was unstable. The foundation was gone. And the man they once called obsolete was now the only one with a plan. The collapse didn't come with a warning. It never does. One Monday morning, the stock opened down 7%. By noon, it was 15. Phones rang without pause. Emails stacked faster than anyone could read. The CEO stood in the executive conference room, staring at a red screen filled with numbers that refused to stop falling. This is temporary, he said, more to himself than anyone else. No one answered. The board meeting that afternoon was short and brutal. The largest institutional investor spoke first. We need a plan, not explanations. The CTO looked exhausted. We've isolated the failures. But without the original architecture, every fix creates another problem. Another board member leaned forward. Say his name. The CEO swallowed. They said it. Across town, he watched the market quietly. No smile. No satisfaction. Just confirmation. Daniel's phone buzzed. They're requesting an emergency meeting, Daniel said. Full board. No conditions. He nodded. Schedule it. The room was different this time. No glass table. No casual laughter. No sense of superiority. When he entered, conversation stopped. Some faces showed relief. Others showed fear. The CEO stood. Thank you for coming. He didn't respond. They talked for 20 minutes. Numbers, risks, projections. He listened without interruption. Finally, the CEO said what mattered. We're open to acquisition discussions. There it was. Not help. Not consulting. Surrender. He placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents. Clean, precise, undeniable. His firm's valuation. Their dependency reports. Legal confirmations of ownership. The room shifted. You're already positioned, one board member said quietly. Yes, he replied. I prepared. For how long? Another asked. He looked at them evenly. Since the day you let me go. The CEO's voice cracked. If we accept this, what happens to us? He thought for a moment. The company survives, he said. Not as it was, as it should have been, and our roles. That depends, he said, on accountability. Silence again. This time it was respect. Outside the room, employees watched through glass walls. Rumors spread in real time. Is that him? Why is he here? Wait, is he buying us? Fear turned into shock. Shock turned into awe. The deal moved faster than anyone expected. Markets stabilized the moment whispers of restructuring leaked. Investors calmed. Clients paused their exits. One message traveled faster than all others. He's back, but not as an employee. The final signatures happened at dusk. When the CEO slid the pen across the table, his hands trembled. I never meant. He raised a hand. This isn't about intention, he said. It's about consequence. The pen touched paper. It was done. That night, the boardroom emptied. He stayed behind. The same building. The same city. Different power. Daniel stood beside him. Any regrets? He shook his head. Just lessons. The next morning, the company-wide email went out. Leadership update. No names in the subject line. Just facts. By noon, the entire company knew. The man they had dismissed was now the controlling owner. And every decision now led through him. In the engineering department, the young manager who once joked about retirement stared at his screen, pale. In HR, the woman who handed him a box avoided eye contact with everyone. In the executive suite, silence replaced authority. He didn't fire anyone that day. He didn't celebrate. He simply began changing things. Quietly, decisively, because true power doesn't need an audience. Power didn't announce itself the way they expected. There was no victory speech, no dramatic restructuring on day one, no public humiliation. Instead, there was silence. And silence, they quickly learned, was far more terrifying. The first changes were subtle. Meeting structures were adjusted. Approval chains shortened. Reports rewritten. No one was fired, but everyone felt exposed. Because competence had replaced confidence. He walked through the office floors without an entourage, without security, without urgency. People stood straighter when they saw him. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Some nodded. Some looked away. A few tried to smile. He acknowledged none of it. Not because he was cold, but because familiarity had to be earned again. The young manager, the one who had joked about fossils in retirement, requested a meeting. Twice. The first request went unanswered. The second was acknowledged with a calendar invite. 10 minutes. No HR. No witnesses. The man entered pale, rehearsed, desperate. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, he said quickly. I was young. I didn't understand. You understood enough to laugh, he replied calmly. The words landed softly, which made them heavier. I hope, the man continued, that doesn't affect my future here. He studied him for a moment. Your future, he said, will depend on your work, not your fear. The man nodded rapidly. But, he added, you'll never forget this moment. The meeting ended early. The HR manager resigned a week later. Not forced, not asked. She left a note. I should have done better. He read it once and filed it away. Closure didn't require punishment. At the board level, accountability came quietly. Bonuses were withheld. Roles were reduced. Titles disappeared. The CEO remained for now, not as a leader, as a reminder. One afternoon, the CEO asked for a private conversation. I stayed because you allowed it, he said carefully. Yes. Why? He looked out the window before answering. Because you need to remember what happens when loyalty is treated as weakness. The CEO nodded slowly. I misjudged you. No, he replied. You misunderstood value. There was a difference. Months passed. The company stabilized, then improved. Systems ran cleaner. Clients returned. Trust slowly rebuilt. But the culture never went back to what it was. Age was no longer a punchline. Experience was no longer optional. People listened more, spoke less. One evening, he stood alone in the conference room where it all began. Same glass walls, same city lights, different ending. Daniel joined him quietly. They'll write case studies about this, Daniel said. Business schools, podcasts. He smiled faintly. Let them. And you? Daniel asked. What do you do now? He thought for a long moment. Now, he said, I choose. The final moment came unexpectedly. At a company-wide meeting, carefully prepared, neutral, professional. The CEO stood beside him. I want to acknowledge, the CEO said, voice tight, that mistakes were made. All eyes turned. We failed to recognize the value that was already here. The room held its breath. The CEO stepped back. He stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile. He said only one sentence. Experience doesn't expire. Arrogance does. Silence followed. Then understanding. After the meeting, the CEO approached him one last time. I never thought it would end like this, he said quietly. It didn't end, he replied. It corrected. The CEO hesitated. If I had apologized sooner. He met his eyes. It wouldn't have changed anything. Why? Because timing matters, he said. And respect given too late is just regret. The CEO nodded. He had no answer. That night, he went home early. His wife was reading on the couch. It's over, she asked. He sat beside her. Yes. She studied his face. And how do you feel? He exhaled slowly. Light. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with balance. They learned. He moved on. And the words that once haunted them now belonged only to him. Not shouted. Not repeated. Just understood. Too late.